Now, since Black Lives Matter was conceived of, we have since grown and made impacts. Black Lives Matter as a network and as a movement has created space for 40 new laws to be passed in 26 states around criminal justice. Black Lives Matter has given us the ability to talk about Black life as being more than about criminal justice and policing. Because we are more than criminals and problems to be solved. We are people who have dreams. We are people who have been resilient in the face of so much. So why limit our struggles to one narrow piece of what it is that impacts our communities? We fight not just for revamping, a transformation of how we feel safe in this country, but we fight to make sure that there is justice and equity in every aspect of our lives. Justice and equity in our economy. Justice and equity in our society. Justice and equity in our homes, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our churches, in our faith houses, in our fields. Justice and equity around the world. Black Lives Matter complicates voting as the primary focus of how Black people can get free. Voting is a powerful tool that, when wielded correctly, when wielded strategically, can create critical changes. It's part of the reason that Black folks have had such a contentious relationship to even being able to access the power of the vote, because of what that represents, right? And yet at the same time, we know that our democracy is so corrupt, it is so corroded, that there's only so much you can do within that arena without changing the arena as a whole. And so we have complicated this idea that if we just stay quiet, stay peaceful, and register, that somehow would create the types of changes that we want to see. Black Lives Matter has complicated and challenged traditional leadership structures and traditional leadership practices, which is also at the same time challenging patriarchy as it manifests itself in our movements. Let me say that plain. We don't need one leader. We don't need one leader. All of us have to be leaders if we're really serious about getting free. And then when I talk about the patriarchy, I mean, let's just be frank. Gone are the days when only men can speak to our vision for what a better world can and should look like. Gone are the days when women work behind the scenes, doing most of the work but getting little of the credit. Gone are the days when you have to hide who you are just so that you can be a part of a movement that has the potential to change your life. Those days are over. That is our declaration to this world. And also, when I talk about challenging the patriarchy, what I mean is, and I really like calling it the patriarchy, just feels like an evil demon to be slayed. It is. It's okay, gentlemen, you can laugh too. But I'm also talking about celebrating, centralizing, making visible the leadership of people all along the gender spectrum. I'm talking about celebrating queer leadership, trans leadership, gender nonconforming leadership, because who else knows better than us what it means to live at those intersections of race and class and gender and sexuality, and have all of those intersections be ways to exclude us from the things that we need to survive, including human interaction and contact. For us, we say there will be no more Claudette Colvins. For us, we say Ella Baker will no longer have to stand to the side so that the men can make the strategies. For us, we say no longer will trans people have to hide in the shadows. This is a movement for all of us. And if all of us can't get free, then none of us can get free. I want to spend my last few minutes talking a little bit about some of the myths of Black Lives Matter. You know, we hear lots of creative interpretations of who we are and what we value. I hope that today, during our commemoration of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., that what we can hold in our hearts is this very simple parable. It's one that some of you may know, but it's one that I hold dear. The parable is, until the lion has its own historian, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Yes, it was that one. Deep. Black Lives Matter is not a violent domestic terror organization. Let's just not talk around it, right? Despite what you will see on Fox News, despite what Bill O'Reilly will say. And yeah, it is really weird seeing your picture flashed across the nation as a violent terrorist who's never been in a fight before. But all jokes aside, Black Lives Matter is created from love. Our values are about ending violence, not perpetuating it. Our beliefs are that in order for us to get free together, Black people, white people, Indigenous people, Asian people, Latinas, Latinos, Arab people, Muslims, all of us, in order for all of us to get free, we have to free ourselves from the fear that somehow one of us is coming for something that you got. Y'all hear what I'm saying? We have to free ourselves from the fear that one of us is coming for something that you got. Because that's the real story that they're telling on Fox News. There's no evidence that Black Lives Matter advocates violence. And I really don't care if there was a Black person saying some really crazy stuff. That doesn't mean they're part of Black Lives Matter. It means they're a Black person saying really crazy stuff. And the very assumption that they're part of Black Lives Matter is racist in and of itself. Just saying. We know who we are. We have an organization, protocols, structures, processes. We also have relationships with each other. Black Lives Matter is not every black person under the sun. It's just not. We have to learn how to tell each other apart, you know what I'm saying? And just keep it real. Keep it real. Anywho. What's dangerous about those narratives is that it gives permission for others who are fearful to wage violence against us. How do I know? I know because when Jamar Clark was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with his hands cuffed behind his back, and when Black Lives Matter Minneapolis, the chapter, sat in the 4th precinct and said, we will not leave until we understand what happened to our brother. And stayed there for over a month. The reason I know that these narratives give permission for people to wage violence against us is because 5 of our people were shot by white supremacists in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And they were so brash and brave about it, knowing that they could commit this type of violence and have no consequences, that they made a video talking about what they were going to do. And then did it. And then weren't arrested for days. And even still, having been arrested, have not been charged with a hate crime. Which is exactly what it was. That's how I know that these narratives are intended to give people permission to wage violence against a perceived enemy, and the perceived enemy is us. Now, those of us who care about peace and freedom and justice, those of us who want an end to conflict, we can't just be upset when people block freeways. We can't just be upset when people disrupt and disobey. We have to be upset when people literally get away with murder. Now there are those who will say, well, I mean, all lives matter. And you're right, they do. In a perfect world, every single one of us sitting here would have the same opportunities, the same access, the same responsibility to ensure the dignity and humanity of life in a perfect world. But I think you and I both know that we don't live in a perfect world. You and I live in a world where all lives don't matter. And so while that should be our highest aspiration, we cannot let that aspiration distract us from what is actually happening. How do we have a world where all lives matter if we don't acknowledge that they don't all matter now? So if we want to get there, and I believe we will get there, then we have to fight like hell for Black lives today. Now in closing, I want to talk about what white people can do. In my short time here, that has been the number one question. And that's a good question. And I'm glad that's been the number one question, because it's not everywhere I go, believe me. So first and foremost, the first thing that we can all do together is commit to ourselves that we won't stay blind. Some of us want to believe, I'm a good person. I don't see race. You can be a good person and see me for who I am. I am a black woman who is queer, who has been in love with somebody amazing for 12 years. I need you to see me for everything that I am, not just for what you hope that I will be. So the first step is being committed to see people fully. Committing ourselves to remove the blinders that make us comfortable. Step number 2, as if this was a linear paint by numbers project. Wouldn't that be nice? Step number 2. Each of us has to commit to having difficult conversations with our loved ones who are not as progressive as the people in this town. The conversation that you can have with your racist uncle and your racist dad, your racist son, I can't have those conversations. I just can't. I need you to know that in coming here, my partner called me and said, I actually need you to be really careful. There's Klan cells all around you. That's my reality. So you have to have conversations with those people. You have to stand up and say, that is not who we are. And we will fight you for hearts and minds. You will not win. Don't talk to me about how many people of color you know. Don't talk to me about how you marched with Dr. King. If you didn't march with Dr. King, you weren't doing the right thing. I don't need to hear those stories. I need to hear the stories like the ones I heard yesterday about the movement that developed here to fight the neo-Nazi movement. That's what I want to hear. Then I can say, oh my gosh, there's so many ways for us to work together. You're doing your work. I'm doing my work. Now let's see where those things align. And the third thing you can do is free yourself from the chains of angst and guilt, the fear of making a mistake. I don't want you to be immobilized. I need you to conquer the fear of doing something wrong so that something can be done. Now those are just 3 simple things that you can do. There are many more. But mostly I need you to remember that we're counting on you. We are counting on you to dismantle the structures that you yourself may not have created, but you benefit from. We are counting on you to create more space for all of us to get free. We are counting on you to remember that none of us are free until all of us are free. Thank you so much.